Hello and welcome to the Trailer Fits Toolbox. Today we're going to have a look at the P gasket for the 300 TDI engine. Now it looks like this. Looks like a P possibly, but on the side it looks like a fallen down P. It fits in here, which is between the water galleries between the aluminium casing and the block. First you'll probably know about it is you'll find coolant that's dripping down at this point where the arrow is showing. It is a weak point with a 300 TDI and it will need to be done at some point. Right, so you'll need a water pump gasket and the P gasket. Numbers here and the links will be below in the video. And we're going to have to do a fair bit of stripping to get to this. It's an extensive job, but one that can be done quite easily. Before you go ahead and strip the engine, alright, the first thing you need to do is drain the coolant and remove the coolant hoses from the top. So what I'm doing here, I'm using a 1/4 inch, possibly 7mm socket to undo the Jubilee clips. Alright, you can see a bit of fluid dripping out there, and the heat hose also needs to be removed. You'll find near the dipstick a bung plug which you can drain off the coolant from the cylinder block. Bit fiddly to get to, but use the 13mm spanner to wind it off. Of course the water's been collected underneath in a container. Just something to loosen the pipe off because they get stuck. You have to undo this clip. This is actually 300 TDI. This pipe is very close to the water pump pulley. Right. There we go. The biggest hindrance you'll have is the intercooler piping at the top here. You can see it's connected to the EGR valve on the turbo. 2 bolts hold that on. You can remove this if you want to. If not, just be careful not to snap the piping, otherwise you'll lose intercooler pressure. We have here a Viscous fan hub coupling remover, which is 32mm. Good idea to remove this, and then once it's out of the way, you've got more area to work on without being hindered. This has a left-hand thread on it, so you undo it, tightening it up as such. Very easy to remove. Just remember not to drop it. Hold it with your hands. And if you look at the hub nut here, you can see somebody's actually tried to remove it earlier with a chisel. Not a good idea. Best to use a spanner. Look, you see the damage on that? Okay, before you remove the serpentine belt, just loosen off the pulley nuts. You can see I've got my hand holding the belt on the top pulley there, or on this case, the power steering pulley. Alright, I'll pull the belt a bit tighter so it will grip. Alright, and you should be able to undo them. They're not that tight, even if they have thread lock on them. Once they're undone, using a 15mm socket and breaker bar, you can then lift up the adjuster and remove the belt. Easy. Okay, that's sprung loaded and out of the way now, so you can carry on stripping. The alternator needs to come off next, and you can see the bottom bolt. Don't pay attention to the person walking through the door. Bottom bolt here, it's a 10mm head. The thread is M8 by 1.25, and yes, I did have problems with this. The thread was stripped out. Unfortunately, with aluminium, once the thread has been stripped, there is not enough metal to retap it. There is a kit available which you can add a new thread to. This is quite common on all engines with aluminium components, not just Land Rover, and the thread restorer, you tap it, drill it, tap it, and fit a new thread in, and these are usually stronger. Now with these more modern engines, you don't have the adjustment on the alternator, but on the top bolt you still have a pivot bolt here. Alright, 13mm bolt and a 10mm head on here. Remove that. Just don't forget that you have wiring at the back here. I would presume you would have disconnected your battery beforehand, and removing the alternator is actually quite easy with the pipes removed, the coolant hoses removed. So once that's undone and your wires are off the back, you can then lift that out of the way. You could alternatively leave the wires on the back and place the alternator somewhere where it doesn't stretch the wiring. The next jobs to do is to remove the power steering pump pulley and the water pump pulley. This will give you access to the bolts that you need. Okay. And with the water pump, definitely need to get these out of the way. You don't need a puller for these, they just come off like this. And you'll need to remove this idler as well. 15mm socket, centre bolt, and you unwind it, it'll come off in one piece. Just remember, when you take it off, it has a locating peg in the hole. Okay, locating peg, and you have your hole here, and underneath you also have a bolt which is holding the casing on, just in there. The three most important bolts on the water pump are these three at the bottom here. Okay, these are the ones that go into the block and pull up the gasket and the casing onto the water gallery. Okay, so you might have trouble with these, I don't know. These are actually lubricated, so they've been out before, they've been taken out before, and they're okay. They might be corroded into place. So once you've got all the bolts out, and obviously I missed one here. Okay, these are shorter bolts. Take that out and you can take your water pump off, like so. On this engine, the power steering pump is in place with no piping on it. There are only four bolts that you need to undo. You don't need to take the pumping off the bracket, you need to take the bracket off the aluminium casing. Alright, once you've unscrewed it, you can then put it out of the way. So just lay it down somewhere. You don't need to disconnect the pipes on that. Alright, so lay this out of the way somewhere. Okay, there, we're nearly there now. Okay, on the casing itself, 1, 2, 3. Long bolt with nut, 13mm, and this one's actually screwed up, so I need a pair of mole grips on it. And the long bolt itself, leave the bolt in place. Alright, leave it just there. You'll see why when we put the casing back on. This one has a 10mm head, so remove that. Then that just leaves this, which is 13mm, to be undone. This is a nut on a stud, and you can undo that, get that out of the way. Once it's undone, you can then remove the casing. It's very clear that the P gasket was a paper gasket and it was siliconed into place. How we will clean this is with a old Stanley blade. Get rid of the old gunge. P gasket actually evens the casing out, so you want to fit the whole thing. And getting this gunk out of the way. Obviously the phantom silicon user was more concerned in saving money than he was actually fitting the proper P gasket. I'm using a M8 by 1.25 tap, a second tap, and this will clean out the threads. You'll be surprised how much rubbish will actually come out of a thread, except on a new engine. And remember, this had silicon in it, so I want to get the threads as clean as possible before we fit this gasket and the P gasket here. Alright, this one, genuine parts, and it's actually made of tin, so it's different from the original, which was paper and fails, so this one should actually work a lot better. If you remember, I said keep this bolt in place, and this is going to be a key factor to supporting the casing while we fit it. Alright, so fit it in the bolt hole and just suspend it there for now. Okay, we then need to lube up with a bit of grease the water pump gasket. This is an old fitter's trick for getting it to stick into place. Alright, so brand new gasket, stick it into place, and we can now forget about it without struggling too much. The P gasket is actually really fiddly to fit, but I found the best way of doing this with the water pump bolts, the three at the bottom. Now they're just underneath my hand. I'm fitting the gasket in place, alright, just like this, with the 3 bolts, lining them up and screwing them in. Just a closer look at this. Okay, I've got the P gasket here. Now push one of the 3 bolts into place, locate it, and I have my P gasket in place. It's just a matter of just loosely putting all the bolts in first, so you get it lined up, and you want 4 bolts in total. The one at the top here, okay, that I'm screwing in, has got the P gasket. Now the P gasket itself needs to be even, so the case pressure as you tighten it up will have this in an even line. Okay, So there you go. See that? It's in place. You can then go ahead, fit the rest of the bolts finger tight, and this is the first thing you need to do. Get even pressure all the way around the casing. Don't forget this is aluminium and it flexes quite easily. So once I've been around once, nipped them up, I can then go around with a torque wrench and set them all to the nominal torque setting. This is on the screen here, and I would advise that you do all the bolts up evenly. Power steering pump can be refitted with the 4 bolts. Remember to get them in the right way. And then you can fit the idler into place. Remember, you have a locating peg there. Once you've wound up the centre bolt, just remember it needs to be torqued up. Torque setting screen here. So the reverse of stripping is fitting. Now you can fit these finger tight. Remember to get them around the right way before you put the belt on. So the same with the water pump pulley. You fit that on and just put the nuts in finger tight. Get your alternator back on. Now you see I'm pushing the bolt in from the back. Not a good idea. Push it in from the front. You probably noticed at some point that the cylinder head is actually off this. If you have the manifolds in place, you'll never be able to get the long bolt off. So keep this in mind if you have a short engine and you're rebuilding it. Long bolt from the front. Fantastic thing about these engines is the serpentine belt is so easy to fit. Alright, if you know how to do this, then I'm pretty sure you won't actually be watching this video. 1001 ways to put it on. I'm doing it this way. Over all the belts. Then pull it up. You got your belt on, and Bob's your uncle, you're away. The only thing you have to be aware of is getting the belts fully in the grooves. If you don't get them fully in the grooves, you end up with something like this, and it's not a good idea because it will throw the belt off almost straight away. So check them on the edges and adjust as necessary so they're fully in there. It's worth spending a few extra seconds to make sure that the belt is all in place. Alright, you can adjust it easily, no problem, and then you're done. If the belt is in good condition, the auxiliary belt, you'll have 2 markers that are apart from each other. If they're in line, then change the auxiliary belt. Just remember that these nuts were finger tight, so what you want to do is nip them up and then torque them up. These are also M8 threads. With those done, you can get your thermo viscous fan hub in place, and this turns anti-clockwise to tighten up the thread. Put it on there, you can spin it on, and once you're done you can then get your spanner, ta-da, and get it into place and nip it up. Alright, that should not come undone. Okay, that just leaves you to refit your cooling system, your hoses, make sure the pipes are all nipped up properly, correct grade of antifreeze, and away you go. You should be alright there. I shouldn't have to remind you, if you've used a torque wrench, don't forget to wind the thing off down to 0 once you store it up, okay? Next job for me is to fit a head gasket, put the head back on, bolt it up and get this engine finished. Until then, we'll see you on the Trailer Fitters Toolbox.